sure by now most are familiar with the idea that, in the uncanny words of Emily Dickinson, one need not be a chamber to be haunted. That a person can be haunted without the need for a ghost, even if we're given the suggestion of one. A person can be haunted by their own experiences, their own thoughts, their past. And even when the danger should have passed, its influence can remain. And while this image of the haunted house can often act as a spatial double for the mind, and the idea of the familiar rendered unfamiliar, of not quite being at home with yourself, what about when we move away from the personal, towards the haunting of collective space, a space in between public and private? In cinema, these hauntings seem to manifest differently, and in a way that more directly parallels Dickinson's poem. Here we are not terrorised by ghosts, even if they may be present in one way or another, but rather, so it would seem, by the building itself, and who we might become inside it. These buildings are old, isolated, empty where we expect crowds of people, or perhaps where there once were. But these spaces aren't haunted by the ghostly figures we might associate with the word, even if this image might still present itself. In fact, I'd say it's not that the building is haunted, but that we're haunted by the building itself. And there are few buildings more menacing than the Overlook Hotel in Stephen King's The Shining, particularly as it appears in Stanley Kubrick's cinematic adaptation, its impossible labyrinth-like structure seemingly watching, even pursuing. And while the idea of ghosts is certainly conjured, the visions that dwell here seem to exist between physical and metaphysical space, traces of past events that might linger in the present.
When something happens, it can leave a trace of itself behind. Say like, if someone burns toast, maybe things that happen leave other kind of traces behind. I think a lot of things happen right here in this particular hotel, and not all of them was good.
And what better place to explore such an ephemeral conception of haunting than a hotel? A place that is itself defined by a kind of ephemeral existence, where people pass through. A space that we occupy, that we live in, but only briefly. This idea of the ephemeral is then frequently paired with that of duality, doubles, mirrors, reflections that create a trace of the present, one that, like the visions projected by the Overlook, is reliant on and responsive to the observer. But the mirror also functions in a more uncanny manner, being, as Foucault describes, a source of shadow that gives my own visibility to myself, that enables me to see myself there where I am absent. And so, through this double, like a ghost, we are both here and somewhere else, physical and projected, the self and the other. It's this other that is often portrayed as the true self, the reflection revealing what the physical body is able to hide. It's in this space that identity can begin to break down. The film, Last Year at Mairenbad, takes place in a similarly serpentine hotel, and uses mirrors to simultaneously fracture identity and physical space, drawing a connection between the character's consciousness and the hotel's infrastructure. Here, intangible space breaks free of the mirror, and the conversation continues as past, present, reality and memory merge together.
Un soir, je suis monté jusqu'à votre chambre. Vous étiez seul.
Laissez-moi. Je vous en supplie. Laissez-moi.
The shifting architecture of the vast hotel provides a visual echo of the characters' confused and competing memories, where one says they've met before and the other denies it. And just as we can't be sure of space and time, we can't be sure of which character to believe, and it seems neither can they. And without being able to trust our own memory, our identity increasingly fractures until we become unavoidably lost.
Il semblait au premier abord impossible de s'y perdre. Au premier abord.
The hotel provides the perfect parameters for this fracturing, not only in its capacity for expansive hallways, but also in its position between public and private. In addition to yet another prevalent use of mirrors and its own type of haunting, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho makes both a clear distinction between these public and private spaces, the private shadowed house that looms over the public and now notorious Bates Motel, and complicates this distinction with its voyeuristic themes and cinematography. And it's only a matter of time before the dark, undisclosed private space violently collides with the public. Unlike The Shining, the ghosts here are not fleeting visions but rather hide in plain sight. images of taxidermy, a grotesque kind of resurrection and preservation, where the dead won't stay dead.
I won't have you bringing strange young girls in for supper.
My mother there, but she's harmless. She's as harmless as one of those stuffed birds.
But the past is shown to be anything but harmless. Despite moving ever further from it, the past still has a hold on the present. It influences our actions, our surroundings, and there are visual reminders all around us. So if this past lingers in the present through the physical space it shares, then this gives rise to another fear. A fear cultivated in the wake of merging dichotomies, past, present, public, private, self, other, that as we become a part of this space, it's now a part of us.
Already, an itty-bitty piece of this shit may have gotten into your lungs, man. It incubates in your lungs. Tissue begins to grow around it like a pearl, like a time bomb.
The 2001 horror film Session 9 isn't set in a hotel, but the abandoned psychiatric hospital entered by a small asbestos removal team is certainly comparable to the grand exteriors of the Overlook or the hotel in Mairenbad. And it's the most overt in its suggestion that these sprawling corridors and rows of empty rooms reflect how we, too, might not be so singular.
Billy, where does the princess live?
In the tongue, because she's always talking, sir.
These taped sessions of a patient with dissociative identity disorder, with 3 alters, provide an explicit parallel to the fractured identity we see in the characters of these films. A fracturing that somehow seems almost inevitable, in the shadow of such vast, oppressive, foreboding architecture.
And where do you live, Billy?
I live in the eyes, because I see everything, sir.
There's a fear that we could be consumed by this space and its history, that we could lose our hold on our own identity in the way that the unnamed characters in Last Year at Mairenbad never really get a hold of theirs, even credited at the end as only A, X and M.
Des salles silencieuses où les pas de celui qui s'avance sont absorbés par des tapis si lourds, si épais, qu'aucun bruit des pas ne parvient à sa propre oreille.
Early in Session 9, a character jokes about how the only side effect of a lobotomy is a black eye, easily treated with sunglasses. But the reality reveals the violence of that which at first might seem invisible, engraving the effect of trauma onto the surface. The haunted house is the classic model for the familiar rendered unfamiliar, but the act of occupying a space in between public and private is trying to force the unfamiliar to be familiar, trying to claim a space as our own, a claim that's far more tenuous, a space that's far more outside our control.
Hello, Simon.
And this fear of empty spaces that seem as though they should be occupied really arises from the sense that these spaces are not empty at all. For, as film critic Kathleen Murphy puts it, these empty spaces are heavy with old air. Traces of the past linger here, as they do in us. The past will not stay dead, and this ghostly force threatens to appear on the surface at any moment and take over. Not as a ghost, but as something inside us. Inside everyone.
And where do you live, Simon?
I live in the weak and the wounded. Dark.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This one was a bit different, as I usually just focus on one film, but this was a lot of fun to do, and probably about time I, mix things up a bit, as I've been doing this for nearly a year now. So let me know what you thought, and I hope I'll see you next time.